It's the Pete Sousa Show. Sports, Pete.
Downtown Waco, Texas, on the 21st floor of the Alico building. I'm Pete Sousa. This is the Pete Sousa Show. Thank you so much for joining us today. Zach Burke on the wheels of steel. We're going to have Darby Brown coming up in about 20, 25 minutes. And we're also going to talk with Zach, a wrestling expert, about our documentary, Mr. McMahon, released on Netflix today. The backstory behind how the documentary actually got made is just about as bizarre as the subject. Mr. McMahon himself. Looking forward to talk to Zach about that. We're going to start off by talking about college football. And we're talking about college football off the field. Matt Sluka was UNLV's starting quarterback. I was over at KWTX, the studio this morning where we film Inside the 12, the Big 12 show that you can see tomorrow on Big 12's YouTube page and some markets around Big 12 country. But I walked into the makeup room to say what's up to the woman, Madison Hawk, that I work with. And she said, "Did you hear about UNLV's quarterback, Matt Sluka?" And at that moment, I hadn't talked to anyone outside of the producer of the show early in the morning, but it was the first conversation I had with another human being, and it was the first thing that came out of their mouth. And at that point, I was like, I have like my meter of like what news is, and I hadn't turned on the TV. I saw the alert, and I thought like, well, it's just another college football NIL story. I kind of whatevered it, and we're so inundated with alerts and stories that I didn't detect myself just how big of a story it was. And then, this morning at work, it was like a water cooler deal. And then I was like, oh, wait a minute. And reading more about the story, it is really hard to wrap your mind around, but it's a great reflection of where we are in college football today. Matt Sluka is from Long Island. He played 4 years at Holy Cross. He was the 32nd ranked quarterback in the transfer portal this offseason, or should I say after the season. He signed with UNLV in January, or committed with UNLV to play. Now, according to his representation and his father, he was promised $100,000 by UNLV. This is according to reports. I'm looking right now at a New York Post report. Also have a CBS Sports report up. Pete Thamel, college football expert, tweeted this out. He was promised $100,000 from a UNLV assistant coach. This is according to his father and his representation. The quote from his dad, "We have no idea what the hell happened." That's what his dad, Bob Sluka, told ESPN. But he never got paid. And the $100,000 that he was promised was never negotiated with the collective at any time. He hadn't heard from a collective. This was all from an assistant coach. And, having the opportunity to cover college hoops and college football, you do get an opportunity to sit down and talk with some of these coaches about the state of NIL. I had one college football coach, basketball coach, tell me last season, a Power 4 coach, that, he wasn't so much the manager of basketball players or a basketball team. He felt like at times he was just managing money and minutes. Because if you don't get somebody enough money, they'll leave. And if you don't get them enough minutes, they'll leave. Well, in this case, Matt Sluka did not get enough money. And he leveraged the 2-0, 3-0 start to leave and basically to put, or he thought at least, Barry Odom, the head coach of UNLV and the UNLV football program, over a barrel. And the team was 2-0, and he hired an agent. So this is where the thing gets really murky. There was nothing signed. And I don't know how uncommon that is in this environment that we're in. I can't speak from experience. I would imagine a lot of this stuff is verbal. And Barry Odom talked about that when Barry Odom, UNLV's head coach, that it was a handshake deal when Sluka committed to go to the school, obviously there was paperwork signed. He enrolled at UNLV, but it was kind of like, hey, let's do this together. We're gonna be terrific, and they were really good. They beat Kansas. They also, who else did they beat? They beat another Big 12 opponent. They beat two Big 12 opponents, huh? Houston. Well, everybody's beating Houston, right? But they beat Houston and Willie Fritz. They beat Kansas, and they're 3-0, and they're a dark horse to take that Power 5 conference, or that group of 5. I think it's called the group of 5, but there's an extra outside of the Power 4. There's another playoff spot, right? And that was there for UNLV, and they were considered a long shot. Now you're hearing things. There was no contract that was signed, and he didn't have an agent at the time when he agreed to this contract, but he hired an agent after he played 2 games, and he wasn't paid any of the $100,000 he was promised. He actually was given $3,000 as a travel stipend, but that's all that he was paid out of the $100,000 that he was promised. His dad says finally the school and the collective came to Matt Sluka and said, okay, we will give you $3,000 over the next 4 months. And that equals $12,000, well short of $88,000. And I the representation and Sluka and his dad seemed to feel that if he had been a higher tier quarterback, he would have already gotten this money. And that's probably the truth, right? Like supply and demand. This assistant coach does not have, he was out of pocket. I hate that term. I just used it though. He was probably not qualified to make that $100,000 promise. But if you're Matt Sluka, you're like, hey, he's offering to pay me $100,000. Okay, I mean, I trust this guy. He just played 4 years at Holy Cross. Oh, by the way, he's like a phenomenal dual threat quarterback. Statistically speaking, he's thrown for more than 300 yards and 6 touchdowns. He's run for more than 250 yards. Again, wins against 2 Power 4 schools. We are now in an era where we are making the rules up as we go along in college football. And we knew that, but if I try to boil it down to a real true fan of UNLV football, like if you are one of the Running Rebels' biggest supporters, let's say you're an 80-year-old fan who all you want to do is see UNLV get to a bowl game or see UNLV, I mean, could you imagine, make the college football playoff? You're off to a 3-0 start. You're headed into Mountain West play. You're a 1.5-point favorite against Fresno State this weekend. And then your quarterback quits. Why does he quit? Because he's not getting paid. Not getting paid the $100,000. And if he didn't, time was of the essence. If Matt Sluka did not quit or leave the school and played one more game, he would not have been able to transfer again. And that was a huge part of the story. It was also important that he hired a representation when he was 2-0. You have to imagine people were like, hey, you're not getting paid. You've got to hire this agent. It's also it's not fair at all to make judgments of the UNLV football program. We haven't heard who the assistant coach was, if in fact he was told this by an assistant coach. We haven't heard from Barry Odom in his second year coaching UNLV. If you remember, Odom was the head coach of Missouri for about 3 years. He's an Oklahoma guy, was a high school football coach in Ada, Oklahoma, if I remember. And he's ascended to this level. He was, obviously, you're talking about an SEC coach just a few years ago, but off to a really good start at UNLV. It's hard to keep up with this stuff. There's a couple other factoids about this. Marcus Cromartie is his agent. We're talking about Matt Sluka. Again, it was an assistant coach, and there was no effort by the school or the collective to finalize the contract. So the collective eventually countered with that offer of $3,000 per month, which would be $88,000 short of $100,000 that was promised. Look, I didn't even know UNLV was 3-0, if we're being honest. I saw, Kansas is one of the biggest disappointments this year in the Big 12, and they lost to UNLV. Kansas is a good football team. I think that they will come back around. They barely lost to West Virginia. Devin Neal, their running back, has had 4 games with 100-plus yards. And I feel like Jalen Daniels sort of found his footing last game. Lance Leipold is a great coach. He did one of the all-time coaching moves. And at Baylor, you had Robert Griffin putting out a statement about Dave Aranda and why Dave Aranda needs to keep his job. At Kansas, you had Lance Leipold releasing a statement to all of Jayhawk Nation saying that some TV shows and some books and some movies get off to a slow start, but they have a great finish, and that's what he expects from his Kansas team. One of their finishes this year was against UNLV, and it was really disappointing. So is this story, if you're a college football fan. I mentioned that UNLV was a 1.5-point favorite. Now they're a 1.5-point dog as Barry Odom and his program goes searching for a new quarterback. Yeah, I mean, I don't even know if it was good for – what if Matt Sluka never gets another opportunity like this? I don't know. It's tough, man. And one last thing I'll say, Cromartie, and that's his agent, and Sluka's dad both said, because there was a report from 24/7 Sports that after the team had gone 2-0, that Sluka asked for more money, and that's where the problems came. They both deny that, and they say it's not true. And now he has an opportunity to find a school, but he can't join until the spring. So that's just a really interesting story, but also kind of a bummer because, again, I think of the fan, the lifetime UNLV fan that was so excited. When your team sucks for a while and they go 3-0 to start the season and they're like getting votes and there's talk of them being a dark horse for a playoff, it's like, man, that's really awesome. And there's so much hope. And the air has left the room in Vegas. And is it a situation where they can rally around their new coach? Who knows? Or their new quarterback? But this guy rushed for 253 yards on 39 attempts. And he thrown for 318 yards, like we said, 6 touchdowns. And the future for him and for UNLV are in doubt right now. I think there's going to be more to come on this story. And we'll all have to stay tuned. It's like these are really all the facts that are out there now. And the fact that we haven't heard from UNLV is a huge part of this story, but certainly something's awry, and it certainly sucks that he left the program high and dry, maybe for good reason, maybe not. We'll find out. The Dallas Cowboys tomorrow night, man, life comes at you fast. They take on the New York Giants in the Meadowlands, and they are looking to get off the schneid after 2 disappointing home losses. Part of the disappointment of that loss against the Ravens on Sunday, which I've said it before, I will say it again, that comeback means like this much to me. They got their teeth kicked in up front, and that's something they may not be able to fix. If they don't have the players to stop the run, then they're not going to win in the National Football League. But it's true. If they don't figure that out, they're not going to win. They also need their stars to perform, and that did not happen last game. Dak Prescott, lukewarm. CeeDee Lamb, bad game. And CeeDee Lamb actually spoke to the media this morning. If you remember, he fumbled, didn't play well. And some of that frustration from that fumble, which was in the red zone when the Cowboys were coming back and really needed a score. After that fumble, CeeDee Lamb was seen on the sidelines, getting into it with Dak Prescott a little bit. Now, we talked about this in our show on Monday. That doesn't bother me at all. And any football environment, any sports environment where there's high levels of competition, like you don't just flip a switch when you go off the field, especially if you're losing. There's intensity, there's all kinds of feelings, and you end up sometimes jawing with your teammates. As long as you're not Buddy Ryan taking a swing at Kevin Gilbride, I mean, it's all kind of fair. No rules in love and war, right? So anyway, CeeDee Lamb it was disappointing for him the way the game turned out. Mike McCarthy, after the game, was asked about players and CeeDee Lamb specifically, how he felt like CeeDee played. And Mike McCarthy said, it's time for us to look in the mirror. And, he answered that. Literally, he was asked a question about CeeDee Lamb and said, well, it's time for us to look in the mirror. So clearly that was directed at CeeDee Lamb. Earlier today at the facility, CeeDee Lamb talked to the media. Here's what he had to say.
Man, just being a professional about this whole situation, understanding it's a long game. But as for me and my performance, I expect a lot out of myself, more than anyone could put on me. And quite honestly, I failed myself, and obviously I failed the team just as far as producing and being that game-breaker player for the team, and obviously the guy that they can lean on. And I kind of let the game get to my head a little bit, but in the same sense, I knew what I can do. I knew what I bring to the table, and I know what I can do on that field. So with that being said, going forward, there shall be a difference.
Is that where you were frustrated mostly with, just yourself, or was it just
Absolutely. Absolutely. Myself, and then like my ability to contribute to the offense, knowing what I can do. So that played a huge part. And once again, can't blame nobody. You got to start with the man in the mirror, and I'm a huge believer in that. And watching that game kind of pissed me off, but hey, I did that. You know what I'm saying? I can't get mad at nobody else. So with that being said, I've learned.
So you don't use the excuse of I wasn't here all summer.
Ain't no excuse for that.
We should know. We know better.
I played football my whole life. I know better.
I love that quote. I mean, CeeDee Lamb has a fan for life. The accountability there and the way that he just was given an opportunity to sort of take a backdoor out of the situation, and he looked in the mirror and he said, I played football my whole life. Just because I wasn't around in training camp and couldn't get a contract done, that has nothing to do with it. And pretty cool statement by him. Pretty cool fashion. I mean, the fashion forward by CeeDee Lamb. He's got did you see the cross, Zach, on the dread? I mean, he's got like beads on the other side. I mean, that's fashion forward. I mean, I see it and I know it's cool. I also know that something I can never pull off. You just kind of have to look at the youth of America and say, way to go. Pretty cool. Way cooler than me. What is not cool is Vince McMahon's plight right now. And Mr. McMahon is out. Zach, we're going to talk about that. Some of the stuff that we've learned about this documentary, we're going to talk about it in segment 3 after we talk to Darby Brown. But, this started in 2021.
Yeah.
And it was apparently, I was listening to Bill Simmons because his production company made it. They had made Andre the Giant, that documentary on HBO.
Which was really, I enjoyed that one a lot too.
Yeah. And so Vince McMahon was familiar with that, familiar with this operation. And hey, I want to make a documentary. And they said, that's fine if you want to make a documentary, but we're going to talk about all the shit. And look at you sipping water over there.
Sorry, I was a bit parched.
No, that's good though.
Yeah. It's my souvenir from the hospital, honestly.
Zach getting right over there.
Yeah, I can measure how much I drink every day. But yeah.
That's a good move. Everybody needs a lot of water. I agree, regardless of what your physical situation is. How excited are you for this doc?
I'm excited to see what all is brought up. There's a lot of things that through the years, accusations or stories that you hear about that you don't know. I'm interested to see what all is brought to light. Obviously, the most recent lawsuit that led to him stepping down from the company, I know is going to be covered in some instances, I would assume, because that's where the problems between the two of them are right now. But I'm interested to see how much of the dirt and just because wrestling can be kind of ugly at times.
Yeah.
And how much of that stuff we get into from the 80s and 90s and stuff like that.
I can't wait. I cannot wait. All right. It's 1:19. We're going to come back with Darby Brown. And in segment 3, we're going to deep dive on Mr. McMahon, its potential and early takeaways that are out there surfacing on the intranet. It's the Pete Sousa Show, powered by the Rogue Media Network.
Show. Sports Beat. Sports.
We are back with from the Valley of the Sun,
Yes.
Phoenix's own. Did you grow up in Phoenix?
Well, my high school was in Phoenix. My parents lived in Scottsdale. So
Okay, it's
yes,
Scottsdale.
but it's all the same, pretty
Yeah.
much. Yeah.
My buddy Peter Flick lives out there. He's been out there for a long time. Him and his family moved back to Philly, where he was from, and his wife demanded they move back to Scottsdale.
Yeah. It's a nice place. Not in the summer, though, but the rest of the year can't beat
What
it.
did you do during summers there?
Go to Michigan, where I was born.
Oh, so would you go to Michigan as much as possible?
Yeah. We'd stay with my grandma on a lake, her lake house for like most of the summer. My dad would kind of go back and forth. My mom would
Really?
just, yeah. So that's the best way to live in Arizona is to leave in the summer. But
Yeah, but you got to have, I mean, that's pretty cool that you had family there.
yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. That was like the only way I knew all my relatives because, you know, we moved to Arizona and then we would kind of go to Michigan in the summer. So yeah, it
Yeah.
was fun.
All right, so you were at Baylor's first basketball practice. We'll
Mhm.
spare you talking about football, at least for now.
Ah.
Well, let me ask you about football. That's
Okay.
actually too good to be true because you were at a wedding this past week.
I was. I
Did you-
watched.
did you watch?
Yeah, I did. I was in a wedding too, by the way. I was a bridesmaid, but I was on the East Coast. So by the time everything had kind of wind down, I was able to.
So you were able to watch by yourself.
Oh yes, I was able to watch the ending of that.
Now
that
you
game.
you cover the school, but it's always better for anyone. I was talking to Matt Mosley about this yesterday about the Cowboys. Like it's always
Mhm.
better when the team you're covering wins.
Yeah,
It's just way better.
for sure. Well, and something like that, you hate to see it, to be totally honest, because it's a game that they had,
Yeah.
and then they lost it, and it just feels like there's some sort of dark cloud over things, you know, one way or the other. So yeah, in that way, obviously you're not a fan, but you're 100%. There's
Yeah.
definitely
Wow.
some,
What was your feeling when that Hail Mary was caught?
I mean, you felt it coming though. I mean, I it kind of was like, all right, this is getting out of hand. They got to kind of get things in. And then it just was like, oh my gosh. I mean, if you like college football, you love to see stuff like that. But if you're a Baylor fan, and you certainly don't want to see that. And, you know, it's just kind of one of those things like it's how you win the game. It's how you lose the game, stuff like that. So it was pretty, you know, just gut wrenching, honestly, for the Baylor guys for sure.
I have a theory on that, like on just the impact. I said it the other day, like by not winning that game, like first of all, you probably would have had that big noon kickoff show
Mhm,
here for their game against ranked BYU,
Yeah.
and you would have beaten Colorado in front of the entire world.
Yeah. Everybody watches them. Yeah.
And now it's like, boom, it just
Yeah.
flips.
Yeah, it really was that, you know, that much of a difference between something that could have been really good for the program and something that feels pretty terrible. And, you know, I listened to some of the interviews after the game, and just the emotions that came out of that loss for the Baylor guys is pretty. It's tough, you feel for them, and you hope that they can kind of get back up here and play a good BYU team, at McLean and all those things. But certainly, I think Bryce Cherry asked Coach Aranda, like, how much are you counseling people after a game like that? Like, how much are you kind of being a coach counselor, kind of getting guys kind of back mentally? And I think there is a big part of that after a loss like that. So
Yeah.
we'll see.
It could go either way. I mean, it could be a trap game for BYU, and Baylor could be like, because they showed signs of being a good team. And again, if the ball just goes a little bit right or left, we're talking about a 3-1 Baylor team in a much different situation. You were at basketball practice, the first one of the season. When you look at Baylor's schedule, especially the non-conference and what they're doing.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah.
You've been around hoops for a long time. Like, does Scott Drew have like an axe to grind with the rest of the country?
It seems like he does want to one-up himself year after year. I mean, truly, it is pretty amazing, the non-conference schedule he's putting together. I did ask, we were able to talk with all the players, really, which is one of the only times a year we're able to actually do that, go around. And so I asked a lot of them, like, hey, what do you think about some of these early games? And, they're all excited, but certainly there is okay, it is go time here, and we got to be ready quickly for really good teams. So it's a gauntlet they're going to get into before the gauntlet of the Big 12. So, but there's really no harm, right? Like, that's the thing, is like, you want to play good teams. If you're good, they're good. You're both going to be tournament teams. There's no harm in losing them. Those are the games you kind of want to play. So I think it's fun for everyone.
What was your favorite part about that? Was that basically like a media day?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean,
it's the first practice,
right?
right?
It was the first practice. And so they typically do something like that on the first week. And so we got to go in and talk to Scott, and then, we talked to all the players, and, we don't get to see much, let's be honest, about the practice. We get to see a lot of stretching and about 10 minutes of drills. So there's that, but it was fun. It's fun to see, talk to some of the new guys. There's so many new players. It really is a new roster outside of like Langston Love and Jaden Nunn. It's a whole bunch of new guys. So it's fun to kind of talk to them, visit with them, see kind of some of their interactions. And that's pretty much all you could take away from it, was that they really do, per usual, seem like a really good group of guys.
They always do.
Yeah.
Who's the kid from Philly we had up here not too long ago? The kid that went to Montverde. Zach, you remember his name? We can look it up. But he's the kid from Philadelphia. He's committed to Baylor as a sophomore or junior, and he came up here to talk to us for this GXG show.
Oh, Rob?
Rob Wright.
Yeah.
Rob
Rob
Wright.
is from, yeah.
He, it's just, he's a typical Baylor
great
kid.
Yeah, they know how to pick them. They really do. I mean, it's both ways, right? Like, some kids are going to see Baylor's program, see what they're about, and they're going to be like, I don't know. Like, maybe it's too much of this, too much of that, or whatever. But the guys that end up on the team and on campus, like, they're bought in, and they're usually a pretty good fit for the culture stuff that they try to do. And, you could just see that in all of them, really.
Couple things about your totality here. You announced that you're leaving, going somewhere else. All I can say is it's very positive. We'll leave it at that.
Yeah.
You've covered.
Well, I said on JMO's show yesterday, it's positive. Although we'll see if Baylor fans think it's positive, but that's the hint I'm giving. So there we go. But it is positive.
It's very
Career-wise,
positive.
personally, it's positive. Yeah.
It's very positive. You've been covering Baylor basketball for 4 years?
5 years.
5.
Yeah.
I remember the day I met you. It was a day I remember that. I have a weird memory. You were talking to Tyler Bolden, and my place had gotten broken into.
Oh, yes.
And I was telling
That
Tyler the
crazy
story.
Yeah.
That was almost exactly 5 years ago you started.
Yeah. I mean, almost to the date. I think I started September 30th, 2019, and I'm going to start my next job that day. So 5 years to the date. Yeah.
So you've covered, let's talk basketball for 4 years. What have you learned about Baylor basketball, their program? Because covering Baylor basketball, you cover all kinds of other exceptional basketball teams around the country. You were in the bubble.
Yeah. For part of it. Yeah.
Yeah. At Indianapolis. But what have you learned about the Baylor basketball program?
It's been really, really special to cover that team. I think, it starts with Scott Drew. He is just the Energizer Bunny and so genuine. Everything that people talks about, that that is who he is all the time. No questions asked. He's going to show up just as, I remember one time he was complimenting my tripod and about how nice it was and how it moved and all this. He's just so nice. So it starts with him, and it, treats the players well, gets all those guys. And then the talent that they've brought in has obviously, been incredible over the last 5 years too. I feel like I've been really lucky to witness. Obviously, they did a lot of good things before I showed up, but I did witness a lot of big moments for the program. I mean, at their new pavilion, forget where it is, but I kind of walked around and there's somewhere where they have, like mementos from big games and big moments. And I was kind of looking at them, and most of the wall I had witnessed them, which I felt like that was pretty cool. Cause it really has been ever since that, that national championship team, which was really covering that team for 2 seasons, because, 2020 season got cut short and then they turned around and won it the next year. So it's been just, I think to tell everyone, what I've learned is just that they are as they seem, like 100%. And it's been really fun to cover that team. Yeah.
Gosh, I got a bunch of stuff to ask you now that I'm thinking about this. So you have had like a charmed run. You went to 2 Sugar Bowls.
2 Sugar Bowls, 2
Final
Big 12
Four.
championships games. Yeah.
Yeah.
Final Four.
On the football side.
Yeah.
What was your favorite part about covering the Baylor football team?
Again, some of those players on that team that won the Big 12, I think specifically like Terrell Bernard and Jalen Petrie, those are 2 guys that I will talk highly of forever. And obviously it's been, Terrell got hurt. He's had some injury issues, but both of them have done really well in the NFL. So it's no surprise. I mean, they're very talented, but they're also it was cool to see them lead those teams and make their mark here in Waco. And so some of those players on that team were really special. And then also it was interesting to cover the transition from Matt Rule going to the NFL, getting Dave Aranda in here. Yeah. And, they had Joey McGuire kind of hanging around to help bridge the gap there. And then he left. And so getting to know some of those people too. So all of that's been, it just kind of always comes back to the people, I guess, that I'll remember. But yeah, some good teams for football, some up and down. It's been a roller coaster with football for sure. Yeah.
Were you in Kansas City when it was called because of COVID?
Mm-hmm.
What was that? Take me through that. Like the chain of events.
Yeah, that day I will remember for forever. Everyone will probably, and there's whatever happened. It's one of those days where you're going to remember what you're doing, where you were. But yeah, I was at the tournament. It was my first Big 12 tournament. So I was very excited to cover, and I brought all my outfits and, all the things. And then we went in there, maybe we got there that first night, we went in there first day. And then whenever it happened, we woke up that morning and the commissioner was talking, and he was talking about how they weren't going to allow fans into the tournament and, things like that. And then it just spiraled into him saying, it was canceled completely. And then shortly after that, they canceled the NCAA tournament. So all of it was very fast and furious and confusing and kind of like, this thing must be really big that we don't even understand it. Yeah. And one specific memory I have is all the workers of the tournament were just frantically like taking everything down, like almost like taking stuff down.
Were you at the arena?
Yeah. Yeah. And so they were just like boxing everything up, and outside the arena where they have all those fanfare stuff, they're just like quickly tearing it all down, like almost as if like they were trying to say, oh, this never happened here, and it didn't happen. Cause I mean, the early games were played, and then the next day the fans were going to be allowed. So anyways, it just kind of was one of those moments where it felt very weird, and, I will remember it. But yeah, I mean, that was definitely eventful in a strange way. And then the months to follow too, I was doing some news, all these things.
I want to ask you about that. Yeah. That's a story. So I remember when I was at our station, KWTX, and it was a Saturday because it was like all hands on deck, and you and Royden Ogletree were sent out to talk to people that were homeless.
Yeah, we did. That was the assignment. Yeah. Talk to them about, whatever was happening. And it was, well, there was that.
I'll just say this. You came back to the station. Your eyes were like, your eyes can get big, but your eyes were huge. Yeah. And you were just like, we were just out there, and like, you were just like, I want nothing to do with reporting news, especially now.
No, I got by, but certainly I learned that was, well, I remember one time I was sent to like a double homicide somewhere and something. Really? And I was calling our friend Christy Soto to be like, if she was a news reporter, and be like, what do I even do? Like, this is, so that was the stuff that was just what, it was the times, like, what were you going to do? So anyways.
Was there a moment for you, and this is back to covering sports, where, because you've grown up a lot, like as a person and a professional here, Was there a moment where, I love the Dave Aranda quote and I use it in my own life. Like, how are things going when they're not going well? Was there a moment you were doing an interview and you don't have to like say anybody, but like, or when you were doing a live shot where it totally went sideways and you had to like find like that inner clutch gene or like that spiritual center where you were like, stay cool and you were able to kind of get through it?
Well, I don't know if there's a specific moment with that. I do think there's definitely been a lot of growth, like for sure. There's times where, I think it kind of comes back to when I first was starting here and trying to figure things out because, I came out of Midland. That was my first market. And then you get to a new one and you got to kind of reinvent yourself and no one knows anything about you or whatever. So I just kind of remember everything going like super fast when I first got here and kind of jumping right in October in that great football season and then rolling into a good basketball season too. So just all of it was kind of like I was just going super, everything was kind of racing through. And I did have to just kind of like, I remember kind of being like, okay, one day at a time, one thing at a time. And at some point, things started to get a little slower and I felt like I was, more established, but I don't know if it was a specific moment. I think it just was like, game after game, moment after moment that I started to follow and witness. And now leaving here after 5 years, there's like a lot of moments and a lot of people that I met and know and witnessed moments and now
impacted.
yeah and so
I'll
now
say it.
and now
Yeah.
it feels like I'm like, okay, like it's a world of a difference from when I first started here. So
Yeah.
yeah, just little by little, I guess.
Was there somebody who you leaned on, like a mentor, as you were going through all this stuff and growing?
Well, at my station, Josh Young, our GM, he really, I worked for him in Midland, so he brought me here. I mean, it is what it is. And Bob, our news director, he allowed me. No, but I mean, Josh brought me here, and so I think I've always leaned on him throughout that, and kind of, I remember at the beginning, he kind of, because I wasn't sports director, and so you're doing that too, like you're kind of figuring out how to work alongside, in another direction. And I remember him just kind of being like, just do what you know how to do, and keep going. And eventually it worked out
Yeah,
well.
there's some drama for a little bit. And
Yeah, a little
you were able to steady the ship. I'll
Yeah.
tell you, when I'd seen you on camera and I was like, wow, like this girl is good. But then when we were at the Big 12 championship and you
Mhm.
hosted that show,
Yeah, that
that
moment.
was unbelievable. I was like telling people, I was like, yo, this girl is really good. I should say this young woman.
Yeah.
You were so calm. You were so cool. There was so much going on. And we were basically hosting like a game day.
Yeah. And hadn't done that because we
No.
stopped doing that. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So and Tyler Bolden was the last one to
Mhm.
host. So we
Mhm.
had a whole year in 2019 where we or yeah,
20 the COVID year. Yeah,
2021, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was like a couple years. Yeah.
Yeah, where we didn't do it at all.
Mhm.
What was that experience like for you? I could not
Yeah.
believe how good you were. I
Oh,
mean, now I
thanks.
understand it. No, really, but
Yeah.
now I understand it. It was like you were made for that.
Yeah, that was really a fun day. I do remember being kind of nervous because I was like, wow, I haven't done anything like that. Really. I haven't sat there
Right
and-
outside AT&T
yeah,
Stadium.
the big desk, the whole thing. I think in that moment I did feel like, Darby, this team. Like, this team in and out, the storylines in and out. And that is where I feel like I kind of could stay calm and could be composed in that space because it was true. Like, I'd covered the team, I knew what we were doing and what we were talking about. So, but yeah, that was a really fun day. And I'll remember that day for sure. So that was cool.
All right,
Yeah.
we'll wrap up with this. Your favorite moment covering sports. Oh, by the way, did you have one experience with Kim Mulkey that stood out?
Oh yeah, a lot of Kim stories.
Was there
honestly.
one in particular?
I'll
Because
say-
she'll
yeah.
make you feel like they say a welcome to the NFL moment. You're
Yeah.
like, whoa, like she's done it to me before. Like where
Yeah.
you're just like, oh my gosh.
Well, I mean, I got to interview her in her house when I had covered her in Lubbock for her, I forget which 100th, maybe 500th win, maybe 600th. Can't remember, but it was one of those big milestones. And so we went out there to see them play Texas Tech, and I was the only one that was out there. So then I got back into town, and she said that I could come interview her at her house, and I needed to be there like in an hour or something like that. And so I did do that, and I remember just kind of being like, Waco is such a cool place. Like, this is so wild that this is a Hall of Famer. I'm here in her house interviewing her, and she to me was, especially at the beginning, I was just so amazed by her, the Baylor women's basketball program, and just the whole thing, because the community loved, and they still do, they loved those girls. And that was, just very unique. So I think that was cool for me as a girl in sports. It was fun to be around her and kind of, I just always felt like I was learning things from her, like she's
Yes.
just kind of one of those people where
It's because
you-
you're smart. Because
you-
when you're no, really,
you're
you're
going to
around her.
listen. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, okay, like I need to pay attention to this person because I'm not going to have access like this.
No, it's a mind like that. Like
yeah.
she's such a high performer type person that you do want to just kind of soak it in because it's just fascinating what goes through her mind every day. Just, and a lot of it's around winning and it still is, it's just, yeah. So she was cool to cover for sure.
Favorite moment? Do you have one?
I have so many. I do think covering that national championship in the bubble when they actually, like, the moment where the game wasn't a very good game when Baylor beat Gonzaga. It was, they kind of was over from the beginning, but just those final moments, it was strange. We were like up in a press box. It wasn't even a press box. It was like a suite because it was all kind of messed up because of the pandemic. And so we were in this suite and, I remember the game went final and just kind of witnessing those moments of them all celebrating and kind of just realizing that, one, this is a very unique, national championship and that the capacity isn't full and all those things, but like this is the best team in the whole country. I've covered them for 2 years at that point, and they just won, the whole thing. And I just remember that being like, and I was a small part of it, because I was along for the ride. So I think that was something that I won't ever forget. But yeah, and thankfully, I'll still be connected to that team in some way. So it'll be good.
Yeah, you're always going to be connected. And
Yeah.
I think it's only fair that this area and this market shares you with the rest of the world. So I think it's a perfect story. Continues to go. I always think your parents did such a great job.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I said this yesterday too, but I'm leaving my brother here, so he's he's a grad assistant for the basketball
I was going to ask
team.
you about that.
Yeah. So I saw him at the practice, which was a funny moment for us just as a family, kind of.
It's cool you got to do at least one.
Yeah, I got to be there, and now I'm leaving him, and I feel like I'm sort of passing the torch in a way as far as in the sports community. So, but so many people to thank from the high school level, everything. It's been a lot of fun. So
Darby Brown on Twitter. What is it again?
Darby Joe Brown.
Darby Joe Brown.
On everything.
Names,
yeah.
One of the best names of all time. Follow her so then you'll know where she's going. It's all good news. Darby Brown, thank you so much.
Thanks, Pete. You've been a blast to work with, and yeah, you're crushing it.
I appreciate you so much. All right. Really. And I don't think we're done, Darby. That's all I'll say.
Yeah.
More to come. But Darby Brown, thank you so much. The Pete Sousa Show, powered by the Rogue Media Network. Back after this.
It's the Pete Sousa Show. Sports. It's the Pete Sousa Show. Sports. Pete. It's the Pete Sousa Show. Sports. Pete.
We back?
Yeah, there we are.
Oh, we are back.
All right, it's hard to kind of do this from over here, but
You're doing two things at once.
trying to. Yeah.
You produce, and now you're going to bring the pain.
Ooh, nice.
I want to talk to you
Okay.
about the Mr. McMahon documentary. I told you I watched the first like 7-8 minutes.
Mhm.
I could not. It was hard to stop. I got a volleyball game I'm doing tonight. Arizona Baylor.
Ooh, nice.
Yeah, huge matchup. But I'm a little bummed. I might try to squeeze another like 30 minutes in. That's how much I want to watch this.
So how much did you watch of the first one?
The first probably 7 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're going to try to get, then you'll have the whole volleyball game. You'll be thinking like, man, I just got 10 minutes left of the.
Dude, I'm telling you, it was one of those things where I thought about watching it on the way over here. What are your impressions of Vince McMahon from all you've known over the course of your life? Watching, WWE.
So the measured response is
measured. I want measured.
okay,
dude.
fine. Then I would say that I think that he is a bad man who has done bad things. That is just the feeling that I get from it. Just like no punches pulled. Wrestling as a whole, through its history, for all the cool and fun things that are there, there's also a lot of like dark and seedy stuff too, because it's a sport that essentially grew out of like, the carnivals and like the, shows like that. Not saying that that's necessarily where seedy underbellies develop, but it makes sense.
But wrestling was carnies.
It was, and it was something that was very regional until Vince himself made it a national thing, where he went in and he bought up all these local territories to make one giant thing that he took national. Then I don't think you can necessarily do that fully without having some skeletons in a way, or things that, develop over time.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
But then once even he got to the national level, like I've heard there's stories, there's accusations that never go away of things from like the 80s and the 90s. And that like there's something every decade that it just seems like after a while, when there's pillars and pillars of smoke, there's fire there. So I'm waiting to see how much of the fire we get to see.
What's the number one accusation that points in the direction of this is a bad dude? I mean, obviously, throw out the most recently one.
The most recent one aside,
where it's like literally sexual assault and I think trafficking is.
Yeah. No, and I read some of that. The statements. Oh, it is. Yeah.
What's her name? Janelle.
I can't, okay. And I feel bad for not being able to remember. But yeah, Janelle's her first name. I don't remember her full name right now.
Okay.
I mean, there were like rape allegations from back in the 80s with a female ref. There's other things that have happened underneath him that are kind of like scummy, but again, that's not directly related.
But
to
don't
him.
Be afraid. Let it rip.
No, I know they had like a ring boy scandal in the late 80s that they had to go talk about on Phil Donahue, of where like people who worked for the company were like, having like sexually assaulting these kids that were helping set up the ring and stuff like that. Like that's going on under the company you run. There's just a bunch of other stories similar to what finally came out in the lawsuit of just like how he is or was with some of the female talent and stuff in general.
And he was still married, right, to Linda McMahon.
Yes, and I don't know how much of a like
Janelle Grant
of a like everybody's relationship is different. So I mean, whatever their marriage was whatever it was, and so I can't comment on that part of it. But all these stories came out while he was still married to Linda. There's the whole steroids trial. Then him constantly like not wanting like wrestlers to unionize. Like there's just a lot of stuff that it just piles and piles over time. And then there's just even the small things that just make me think he's just a weird dude in general. Like he is the stories that former writers and stuff would tell, where he's so obsessed with having control over everything that like he viewed sneezing as him losing. Like he refused, like the bodily function that our body does. Like he would try to will himself not to do that. And when he would be pissed off at himself. So like there's always just little things like that make me think like, okay, I think like he didn't know what a burrito was, but yet he'll stay up at work and work out at like 3:00 in the morning. He doesn't have a schedule.
He didn't know what a burrito was.
That I heard a writer say like they had lunch one day and he walked by and asked him what he was eating. And he's like, a burrito. And he was like, what's that? And he had to describe to Vince what a burrito was.
What about wrestlers and his relationships with them. You mentioned different relationships with every wrestler. What I want to ask you, what wrestler do you think just he stuck it to the most? Like that really Vince McMahon not only was, had a rough relationship with him, was detrimental to his career, but even his life.
Ooh. See, I feel like eventually if you had problems with Vince, that's why you wound up in other places. Like that's why there was something wrong with him and Randy Savage there in the 90s that eventually Savage left and went to WCW for that. The one that's been in my head here lately that seems to be at least kind of mending over now is Jesse Ventura a lot. And it's because I've seen him on a lot of things too, but I think about the time where he had a career as a wrestler before and then was a commentator afterwards, but he went and worked on Predator, the movie set, and he is a part of SAG because of that. Well, and learning things like that and seeing how SAG took care of people. And Jesse Ventura also tells the story of, and I'm blanking on his name, Upshaw, who used to be the NFL PA, Gene Upshaw. A random elevator ride with him of dude, you guys need to unionize because all workers are 1099 workers. It's how it's always been. And so it was of just the conversations of Jesse bringing up hey, our thought and I get this taken care of with SAG, yet we don't get anything here. And so him trying to unionize in a way.
A cup of coffee on a movie set.
Exactly. And it led to Ventura trying to unionize. And then, even before that, he tried to get royalties from the stuff that he was a commentator for. They weren't paying him royalties for that. And then he tried to unionize, and Hogan, apparently, according to Ventura, I can't stand Hogan, that's another guy, ratted him out to Vince. And I think eventually he was fired for that then too, for trying to unionize. And it's a guy that, he went and did other things, and obviously he did fine afterwards. But I look at a guy like that, and I know there are other smaller guys where it's just if he didn't feel like they worked out, then he has nothing for him kind of. And I get that it's a business, but it's weird that it's just one, I don't know. I guess you get into that role of when you're the one person who controls the entire show of being able to just be yeah, no, we don't have a place for you. Or I didn't like how you were with that. You're gone here. But
the untimely death of all these guys.
Yeah.
Now, does he bear responsibility in that respect?
That's tough. Yes and no. I'll say of times that I would assume that if he was telling him hey, you need to go out and do this in your match, and it led to certain head injuries and stuff like that, then obviously, yeah, he's into it for a way. But I think some of it is wrestling as a art. I won't say sport. I know some people get up in a tizzy of that.
I think
but yeah, it's a very physical, demanding thing that if you mess up, you can hurt yourself really bad. And the chair shots and all that, the whole attitude era of feeling the need to go and push it a little bit further. Yeah, that was unnecessary. CTE is going to be a massive problem in wrestling like it is in the NFL and other contact sports like that. And so I think that some of it, though, in a way, probably falls on the wrestlers themselves too, of knowing what you're getting into. Kind of the same way a football player of we have all these concussion studies, but some of it does rest on the wrestlers, and some of it I wouldn't put it all on Vince, but if it was him asking oh, we need to push this to make it a little more violent, then I think that's, if you're getting a directive from above you, then yeah, that bears some responsibility. I feel at least the stories I've heard here lately, and a lot of it is as a company, they're a lot more let's not push it too much. Let's not do that. And they've tried to, be more of, it's usually when they do things, it's the wrestlers coming up with those ideas. And in that case, you got to hold the wrestlers responsible for it, I think.
How about drug usage? Forget about the steroids. Was he complicit in turning a blind eye to some of the abhorrent behavior?
Oh, I'm sure. And that's just because it's just like any sports franchise, or I don't want to say college program, but reading that book, The System. Yeah. It's like that, of where there are people underneath you that shit still happens, that it's going to be your responsibility in a way, even though you had nothing to do with it. Yeah, there are plenty of things that happened under his watch per se, that I'm sure he just got a phone call of hey, Iron Sheik and Hacksaw Jim Duggan got arrested and they had crack, just like anytime an AD gets a call, or one of their students that got, arrested for something like that. There was tons of that happened.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's maybe the wild west of it's like, hey, as long as you get to the next town, I'm sure that the bigger, I know
long as you
the
get to
bigger,
it.
better guys were treated and taken care of better than some of the smaller guys, but that's just because, like, you know, Hogan's gonna bring the people in there. Nails or Crush or whoever these, you know, lower tier guys you can go and find. I'm just, you know, thinking of,
See
yeah,
you later, Crush.
yeah.
Yeah. How has he kept wrestling, and no longer, he doesn't anymore because he's not with the company, but how did he keep it at such an elite level? Like he wrestling is like the NFL almost.
Yeah.
They went through some dark periods where it was like, yeah, it's just gonna go, and then it's like he figured it out.
He did. So
How to maintain that money chain.
he took it and made it a now global thing. Like, I can't take that away from him. He took a regional business at best, made it national, and then turned it global into that. So for a while, part of it is, and I don't want to add that like it was a problem. Like, sure, he's had competition, but it's not been major competition. And when you're the only like polished, like great looking product in town, it's always a little bit better to beat out anything else that's around. But that kind of takes away from him and what he was able to do. I think he was able to see that he works the fans in the same way business wise as obviously the wrestlers do. And I think it's that it comes down to, I've heard Jim Cornette tell a great story of how it's so easy to get into wrestling, of like, if you go somewhere and you know, see two guys pulled over on the side of the highway and they're beating the piss out of each other, you might stop and be like, what in the world's going on? And as you're stopping and watching, one of the guys really big, right? And this big guy's just welling away on this poor little guy. And you think about stopping and getting out of your car to go help this poor little guy because, man, he is just having it, you know, given to him. But then eventually this poor little guy starts fighting back. You start rooting for him. And next thing you know, you're invested and you're watching. And it's as simple as that to pull somebody in. I think that he has found, through all the amount and like resources that he's put into the whole writing and producing wrestling TV, he's found a way to know what his audience wanted for a long time. Eventually, I think towards the end, it got a little bit stale, but he was really good at being able to at least work the audience and know what the audience wanted for a long time.
Specifically, how did they unseat or just basically finally keep the WCW at arm's length before just putting it down? Because what is it, 83 weeks?
Yeah, it was
right?
83. Yeah, it's something. So I think it was
WCW Monday Night Raw.
It was the stars they developed.
Yeah.
It
What
was
it
the
called?
guys.
Monday
Night Wars.
Monday Night Wars beat Monday Night Raw.
I'm sorry. Nitro beat Raw.
Okay.
Yeah. It was Ted Turner, and I still remember it. Like, Vince tells the story, and you can tell it obviously with the WWF or WWE turn after you win it. But Ted Turner telling him, like, I got in the wrestling business, and he always hated Ted. But I think the thing is it's the stars they developed, the Stone Colds, the Rock, the personalities they were able to create, and getting the fans behind other guys like Mick Foley and stuff, while WCW just couldn't, like, that realism kind of faded. And what you had at WCW was a lot of guys that kind of went into business for themselves, where I think with Raw, you had a more team-like atmosphere of like everybody was trying to help out everybody else. And it worked as a whole show to be able, it was one cohesive unit that was able to kind of finally pull itself up and take that back over.
What are you most excited for about this documentary? Like, what is there anything you have heard about or anything you anticipate learning about that you don't know much about now? We talked about before the show, like, you know, wrestling inside and out. It reminds me of when I saw, this is before the Once Upon a Time in Queens documentary about the Mets. There was a Doc and Daryl documentary that Judd Apatow did. God bless him, but it wasn't any good. It was nothing that I didn't know already. So what could get your attention and satisfy you as a wrestling fan?
I would just like, more than anything, this is as a wrestling fan, for the people who aren't necessarily the biggest ones, I would like them to just like pull out all the stops and us just kind of get like a view of like, here's everything that's just come up. Even if we don't dive into it, like, let's just put it all out there of like, these are the things we're dealing with here. I think that a lot of the time it's what we've seen lately. I would like to see just as personal a look of Vince McMahon as a person that we can get. And I just don't know if we're going to be able to get that, because it's a man who was able to control every aspect of his show and his business and his life. And I'm interested to see if we're actually going to be able to get an actual glimpse of the real man himself, because I don't know how much he'll be willing to show, even about something that was supposed to chronicle him.
David Shoemaker was talking to Bill Simmons, and he mentioned that. He's like, this is easily the most bizarre subject I've ever covered or ever tried to cover. He just talked about how weird it was. Like, even the interviews, like Vince, even when he wanted to do this, because the project was, he was on board, it was basically his idea. Even when he wanted to do it, he still wasn't doing it. You know, he's showing up late, and you got to imagine a guy like that, he knows how to be on time. When I was working in Charlotte, I was so amazed. I mean, this was I don't want to say a BS, but it was a Monday Night Raw in the middle of January, and there Vince was at 10 in the morning in like a small classroom downstairs with everybody, or a press room, going over what was going to happen that night. I mean, he was that hands-on at every event.
I saw Dave Bautista tell a story recently of he was late, like the day after winning the Royal Rumble, and they thought that he was going to lose his, like, he was like, I'm going to be fired for this, for being, like, he thought about that. So a man that you're worried about firing you for being late doesn't purposely, you know.
So it goes back to what you said, just controlling everything. Even
Exactly.
the stuff that he's not able to control. All right, Zach Burke, that was amazing. We'll be back tomorrow. The Pete Sousa Show, by the way, presented by Slovaceks. Come on, and Crawford Austin Properties. We'll be back on Thursday. Have a great Wednesday.
It's the Pete Sousa Show. Sports, Pete.
We are Rogue Media Sports.